All right. So everybody's using Zoom like I am, of course. It's the hot thing somewhere, and it's the hot thing lately. But now everyone's examining the security, and they're all getting upset. There was a big flack a month or two ago about the Mac client that ran a background service so they could bypass the normal update process. And here is one that a lot of people are trying to decide what to make of. If you send a chat message like this that refers to a local shared path on a Windows system, and if somebody clicks it, then it just launches that, and you can put executable code here. So that's sort of code injection, although you do have to click it. And there are people who have found ways to make that more subtle, like they can steal your, they can put up a link to a file share on a remote server, and your machine will send up a NT password hash to that server. Now, normally in corporations, this would not be much of an issue because almost everybody has enough sense to block port 445. But home networks, which is where everybody is now that they're working from home, probably don't. So that might expose a password hash. Now, the point of a password hash is that you couldn't use it to get the password, but you can crack it if the password is weak. And on Microsoft systems, you can log into a share with nothing but the password hash with a pass to hash attack. So that means that you don't need to crack it. Anyway, so that's, people are getting upset about Zoom vulnerabilities, and there's quite a few other Zoom vulnerabilities. So people are getting upset about it. I'm still using it because I don't have any secrets in Zoom, but certainly people are getting upset about it. So here's highly disturbing idea. In Alabama and Massachusetts, they are informing people of the addresses of people that have coronavirus. This is sort of like the sex offender registry. They'll tell you where sex offenders live, so then you can go like avoid those people or burn down their house or throw eggs at it or something. This is the kind of thing that is probably not a brilliant idea and probably a violation of the law. New Jersey tried to close their borders, and they tried to send the police to interrogate anybody that came from New York City to try to stop people that were infected coming in, and that also is probably illegal. The president said he was going to quarantine New York, and that was also illegal. So there's an awful lot of these things going on. I think Texas has also closed their border and stuff, and is trying to make everyone quarantine that comes in from another state. There's really a lot of crazy stuff going on. We'll talk about this a little later. But this I found very interesting. You can see the projections. These are the projections that seem to have finally convinced the president that this is a real thing and you can't just ignore it, showing how many people will die and how many people will get sick. And this is, here's the deaths and here's the infections for the nation. And you can also take a look at California. And in California, it is much, much better. Notice the lineup here is the total number of available beds in hospitals. And these are the projections. This is because we have now been locked up for more than 2 weeks, I think. And that means that we have moderated the curve from this, spread it out to here, so that it should be much better in the sense that all the people that get sick should be able to go to the hospital. And I've read a lot of tweets and blog posts from people that are in hospitals in San Francisco, and they're saying it's okay. They are not overwhelmed. They haven't used up all the respirators or all the beds or anything. So it's really good. We have done the right thing in California and San Francisco, far ahead of most of the nation. Meet in front of the school or the parking lot tomorrow at noon. Sure, okay. Let me make a note of this. I think it's not going to show up on the screen. Let me just put it over on this screen. That's my plan. I have 2 screens and I'm only projecting one of them, so I can perhaps deal with, yes, there we are. And save. All right, good. Yes, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow at noon there. Good. Okay. And anyway, that's good news. This I thought was awesome. Most people ignored April Fool's Day, but not the BBC. So they posted this video of penguins flying. And it looks like somebody put a lot of work into this.
They don't need to huddle together every winter for protection against freezing cold, because these little fellows will do something no other penguins can. incredible ability? Well, they fly thousands of miles, rainforests of South America, where they spend the winter basking in the tropical sun.
So there you go. Anyway, and I thought this was a useful infographic. And this is something I've seen from, I've been listening to venture capitalists on podcasts, and they're saying, we're going to have this virus crisis, and that will be resolved in about a year when we have a vaccine, and perhaps earlier if we can do things like contact tracing. But that's going to damage the economy very greatly, and it will take years to come back, something like 3 years of recovery from that. And of course, right behind this comes climate change, which is very similar. And just like the coronavirus, we are not doing anything about it far after all the scientists say we really should be doing something about it. Anyway, so Russia has decided to make an app to track people with coronavirus. So you will have to, if you get infected, you will be required to install this app, and this app will then create what they call a digital concentration camp, where they keep track of everything you do, keep track of where you go, and you won't be allowed to leave the house, and you'll be punished if you leave the house and all that jazz. An early version of it came out, and I wasn't able to get an APK to install, but there is a person who posted a deconstruction of it using JADX, the same thing we've used in some of our apps. I haven't had time to look at it, but you can go here, this is in my news links, and see how it's built. And they say it is built very poorly, and it gives all your information to the government, and they're pretty upset about it. It will probably be officially available pretty soon, and then we can get the official copy of the app and play with it and see what we make out of it. Here are some web labs that are free to practice, so people might want to check these out, especially in the web app hacking class, which is tomorrow night. I'll look at these and see how fun they are, but it looks nice. A bunch of labs people can do for free. And here's another issue in Zoom. If you have local privileges on some local access to machine, you can turn on the webcam apparently. But when I looked at this, it didn't look to me like you could really practically do it from a distance. So I wasn't too excited. But anyway, a lot of people are posting flaws in Zoom. All the security people are finding holes right and left. And some people say you should quit using Zoom and use something else. There's apparently an open source alternative called Jitsi. And I'm just figuring Zoom will patch this stuff, and I don't really care. But anyway, it's getting a lot of news. Decreased travel because of SARS has caused no emissions to decrease. Yes, absolutely. Air pollution is fantastically down. You can see it in San Francisco. Right now, a little haze has come up over the bay, but everybody has noticed fevers are way down, flus are way down, asthma and all kinds of other problems are down now that people aren't moving around and driving very much. So certainly true. Yeah, CO2 not so much. That would make sense, because I think CO2 is what's not coming out of cars is being replaced by the increased usage of electricity, I would suppose. And so here's a 0 day for Zoom. Another one, Patrick Wardle wrote this one. So a local attacker where they have physical control of the machine, they can do things like steal your credentials and such. And so anyway, it's a lot of people are finding flaws in Zoom, and they'll presumably be motivated to patch that stuff. This one here, I remember, will not shut up. So this one I thought was very fun. And I think I'll talk about it more in tomorrow night's class, but we've got time. So let me just mention, this is a very fun vulnerability. OpenWRT is a replacement for your router firmware, although apparently people are using it on other devices too, but that's the most common use. And then you get to use fancy features of your router, like filtering traffic and going to channels that are illegal in America and stuff like that. And what this guy found is a very nice vulnerability. There's a package manager in OpenWRT. OpenWRT uses this command called OPKG, which is like apt in Kali and Debian, to download packages, and you can install packages on OpenWRT. But it turns out that it retrieves the list of packages over an HTTP connection without encryption, which is a really bad idea, because of course you can just poison the DNS resolution and cause it to go to a different server, or alter the traffic with a man-in-the-middle attack. There's a lot of ways to fool an HTTP connection into delivering the wrong thing. So when you do, however, it has a security measure. Supposedly, these SHA-256s are compared so that if you have an updated package list that was not poisoned, you could tell if a package itself was poisoned by comparing the SHA-256. But this authentication never worked. And it is kind of fun why it doesn't work. Here's the bug. He asked if you could spot this bug, and I actually did spot it. Notice you're going through this thing trying to take the characters in that configuration file and remove the SHA-256. But here is the question where you ask if it's a space. And if it's a space, you skip it, but then later on you just use that variable without skipping it. So you end up always, the way the default configuration file is set up, there is always a space before this, SHA-256 : space right there. And this buggy code always copies that space into the SHA-256. And so when you compare it, the comparison detects that there's a space in it and it's invalid. So it does not do the comparison and accepts it. So in fact, the SHA-256 can be wrong and it never does anything about it. So you can use this to replace any packages you install with poison packages, as long as you make the total length of it the same by just padding it with zeros, and he proves that. So it's quite cute. Again, I don't think it's a huge risk because most people aren't constantly installing new packages, and you'd have to, I think, target an individual user to trick them. It's a flaw in the product, but I don't think it's a fatal flaw. And they did patch it. Anyway, I was just talking earlier, I'm not sure everybody was here, about the fate of City College. The classes all the buildings are closed until further notice. And so I don't think there'll be any more opening the buildings this semester. And I kind of doubt they'll open in the summer or the fall, but that has not officially been determined yet. But I think all classes are going to be online for quite a while. Certainly all of mine are. Anyway, so let's talk about this Android stuff here. And I mentioned before, there's this web page you can get to. Might as well make this big. There is a guy that uses the name F Society from Mr. Robot, has been doing a lot of fun things. And one thing he does is he tracks a lot of government apps. He does a lot of hacking into government apps. And he's developed the attack on the Indian Aadhaar Act that we've been doing in the projects here. And he has gathered all these government apps. Many governments all over the world have announced apps to track COVID-19 infections. And so he has gathered them here for Android and iOS and listed them. And he encourages everybody to take a look at them and see what their security flaws are and such. And that may be fun. I haven't been through any of them yet. I think I managed to install one of them, but I didn't really get it to do anything fun. But it would be interesting to check these out. So we've been through part 1 and part 2. Now we're up to part 3. We're just going to do more exploiting devices and then infiltrating user data, which is stealing the user data. And I see a chat message asking if accreditation will be affected. I have not heard anything about that. I think the accreditation crisis at City College is over for the time being. We got past it, and I don't think anybody is going to punish a college for doing strange things during this time of crisis. So I haven't heard anything about that. I think accreditation will be fine, at least for a while. In fact, I've heard some people say that enrollment will probably go up in the fall because everybody's trapped at home, so they'll all just take more college courses, and that might even solve our budget crisis. So we might even, as an institution, we might even be healthier during this lockdown. There are a few industries that thrive during this lockdown, whereas most people have no income and go broke. But education is one of them that probably will thrive, at least the part of the education that can be done online. Now, courses that must be face-to-face, like phys ed, I do not know what they're going to do about that, and I think they're trying to figure it out. Anyway, so to exploit your devices, we mentioned before, you can use the JavaScript interface where code goes in, and if you use Drozer, it will inject code. You can also do it. This is what I was just talking about for the OpenWRT. If you load anything over HTTP, like ads, then you can poison the ads by just doing a man-in-the-middle attack and modifying the HTTP as it goes by, or poisoning the DNS so that the request to load the ad goes to a different server where you put a modified ad. There's plenty of ways to do it, and Drozer and BERT have an automated way to do it if you use the Droser agent. So you can put code on the page that loads a JavaScript in the script part, in the header of the page, and this will load JavaScript and run it. And so you can then have control of the page where you can insert JavaScript and run whatever you can do through JavaScript. And if they're using the Java extensions here that we mentioned, JavaScript interfaces, then you can use Java to run Java methods, and it gives you then you'll have as much power as that app has. So another thing is apps that manage their own update, which is what has gotten an awful lot of apps into trouble. This, by the way, is how the Macintosh first lost their zero virus claim. Up until about 5 years ago, Macintosh would advertise you should get a Mac because there are no viruses on a Mac. It's not like a PC. And it was, I think, an Adobe, or it was a Flash. It was a Flash update, which was going on the Mac automatically, also PDF reader. It was an Adobe product that bypassed their normal update channel. And Apple didn't like that, so they blocked those updates and put it through some Apple proprietary thing, which slowed it down, so you'd only get an update every 6 weeks, and that gave time for a virus to spread through the Macs. And Apple had to take down that bullet point, claiming there was no malware on the Mac. Anyway, so apps can have their own custom update process if they want to, but that means the app has to have the ability to install packages, and it might load that data over HTTP, so you might download a poisoned, altered copy package and install it. All right, so you can do that with the Droser. There's some special options in here to automatically do that, to modify an APK. Now, the one thing that I wonder about here is how you would get the signature to match. But anyway, I'm not sure how they ever overcome that, and I don't remember being discussed in the book. I haven't tried this one for live. Now, the Droser agent has this Bowne method that it defines, and you can execute it by injecting code that starts with Bowne. All right, so anyway, another one, remember these browsable apps are ones with the ability to open web pages, and so you can define a scheme like SMDM, and now if you have a URI with SMDM:// it will execute that MDM client app, which is mobile device management. So Samsung had this software on there, and you can now call the software. And what they've defined is they've defined something here that is browsable, and it has the ability to install packages. So you can use their mobile device management to install packages without the consent of the user. This is a common problem. When you have a mobile device management solution, you are giving control of your device to your company, but if it's not secure, then anybody can hack into the mobile device management solution and control your device, and that's what happened here. And a lot of the earlier mobile device management solutions had these problems. So you'll see something like this. A new version of the client is available, and people will get in the habit of clicking this, saying it's okay. If you use a Windows server in a domain, you'll see these pop-ups from the domain controller saying, you're installing managed software, you must install this, and people just get used to agreeing and putting it on. All right, so if you want to improve this, you can use social engineering to fix a drive-by download attack. Remember, a drive-by download attack is where you open a web page and it tries to install something right away with as little user interaction as possible. So those are drive-by downloads. Now, you can make pages that automatically download something, but you usually can't make a page that will automatically install something. Although that happens occasionally, people tend to fix that. So what you do is you put up a page that says some kind of error message, missing plugin, update required, something like that. Now, even so, even if you get someone to download an APK, you cannot install from an APK on a default Android device. Now, we've been doing it on these emulators because they're configured to allow that, I imagine, although I looked through it a little bit and I couldn't find exactly where they configured it. But in general, real phones will not let you do this. You can only install things from Google Play. If you want to allow something to install from an APK you get elsewhere, then you have to turn on unknown sources in security. In Android 7 and earlier, you can just turn this on and then you can install from unknown sources all the time. In Android 8 and higher, you have to specifically allow this for each app on a per app basis. But you still can do it, but they've made it more difficult for someone to sneak this past you. Then you can talk about how to launch an app. Even if someone installs it, it might not launch. So the receive boot completed is the permission that will let the app start when the phone boots up, but that was only in older versions of Android. Another thing you could do is load an iframe in a web page with a method that would launch the app. But now you can't do this anymore since Android 3.1. Newly installed apps won't receive this. Again, you'll have to get the user to agree to it to try to prevent it from happening automatically. In Android 4.4, it won't download an APK automatically, and you have to trick a user into doing it. You can't launch it from an iframe either. So, you know, Google does patch these things, and you have to trick the user, but all you have to do is make a page that will trick them into clicking on something and agreeing to something they shouldn't agree to. Most people are easily fooled, but it is more secure in that if you are careful not to take careless actions on your phone, you'd be safer. Now, another question, a big part of the Android security model is these permissions. When you install an app, it says this app can get to your network connections and your stored pictures and stuff. And theoretically, users are supposed to read that and make a decision. In practice, I think almost everybody just ignores that the way they ignore the terms of service and just clicks OK. But anyway, if you do want to get past that, and you want to do something the user did not agree to, then you have to break out of the sandbox. And so you can have an app that doesn't request any permissions, but then it uses a vulnerability to break out of the sandbox, typically a kernel exploit, which lets it circumvent those permissions. There have been quite a few of these, and of course they get patched, but there's always new ones coming out. Here's a fairly common flaw. This is something we have seen quite a lot in the exploit development class. Here is an app which was in the Samsung Galaxy 3, and notice what it does. It does do shell command, dump state greater than data log. It has a shell command executed. Then in the red, it has command line code, and then it puts a string in here which came from the user. So you have a line of code that's executed that includes user-controlled content. So all you have to do is give it a malicious string, which is put it from in your user input, and then it will do something here. So you can see in the example down here in the second line, it has this .. dev null system bin ID to SD card shell escape, which will just take the identity of the user and write it into a file on the SD card, just a simple demonstration that you can execute arbitrary commands. This is why you never should create a line of command line code and execute it when it includes user input. This is how you get classic command line vulnerabilities, command injection vulnerabilities. All right, and here's another one. You can do privilege escalation using object input screen because of a serialization bug, which is a very common problem with Java. And now here's Jeff Forrestal. This is a very famous hacker named Rainforest Puppy, the guy that first published SQL injection, the man that invented it. And he then presented this fake ID vault on the next slide here. And this fake ID font is pretty awesome. Android did not verify that a certificate was actually signed by its issuer. So you could claim to be from anybody and it would believe you. So you could just claim that you were Adobe Systems Incorporated and it would just escalate you because it trusts Adobe. This, by the way, was also true of Internet Explorer 3 or 4. It would check if a certificate was valid, but it would not check if the certificate above it was valid. So you could put in forged certificates and lie about where they came from, and it would not detect that. Just as we've seen in our auditing a lot of apps in this class, HTTPS seems to be too difficult for an awful lot of developers. They often implement it poorly, where they do not do all the checks that are required, and the certificates are not actually validated. HTTPS, if correctly implemented, gives you a very high degree of security, but it's frequently not implemented correctly. And so now we get to infiltrating user data. I think infiltrating is a little bit strange word here. Well, I think what they really mean is stealing the user data. But here's the point. You can steal things, turn on the microphone, read the SMS, look at the contacts, record the screen, location, the GPS. These are all those personal things that you probably don't want the whole world to know. And people are now getting very upset because many, many governments, including US governments, are thinking they're going to collect this location and identity data from everybody's phone in order to track coronavirus. And of course, This is a lot of civil liberty people are getting pretty upset, saying this is like how you end up with a bad law like the Patriot Act. You have an emergency, everybody freaks out, and they give up their security or their privacy in what's supposed to be temporary, and then you keep extending it and hold on to it forever. So one proposal I've heard, which I doubt will be implemented, but it would be very nice if they would pass some kind of emergency law that the government can track everybody's location, but only for a year or two. However, we will see what happens. But in other countries, people have been giving up a lot of their rights, and we'll see how much of that happens in America. Anyway, so you can disable SE Linux enforcement. This is one option. SE Linux is the thing that limits a lot that Android can do, like any other form of Linux, and it can be turned off. If you put it in permissive mode, then it will not block anything. SE Linux can limits what actions are allowed on a device, and they limit what each app can do, but there's an enforced mode where you can't do things, and there's permissive mode where it just like logs violations or something. So you can lower it to permissive mode, which would make it easier for an attacker to violate these rules. And if you can record video on there, you can record them unlocking the phone. And then if they have one of these lock patterns where they have to trace out a shape with their finger, you can catch that as a video. You can steal files from the SD card on old versions of Android. Every app had access to the SD card. Now only apps that have this read external storage permission can do it. And you can steal Wi-Fi keys. They're on the device. They're apparently stored in plain text. So all you have to do is get into another app's storage location, and you'll find the passwords just sitting there. I know a similar problem is that if you get Chell on a normal Mac, you can dump the Mac user's keychain. This is how Caitlin stole my passwords, and Duffy stole them before by just sneaking up and using my Mac, which is one thing. Now that I'm online and not physically in the room, it'll be harder for students to do that. If you use airplane mode, won't Big Brother lose your location precision? Haha. Jimmy, it's a good question. And I would like to say yes, if you use airplane mode, they won't have access to much of anything, but on the other hand, you can't get any good out of your phone. You can't receive a call. So yeah, if you take the battery out of your phone and turn it off, then they can't track you. But of course, nobody wants to do that. They want their phone to work. And that means you need to be connected to a cell phone tower so they can get your location to that extent. But what you really want is Wi-Fi to get it accurately. Yeah, it's a good point. Of course, another thing that might happen is if you turn off Wi-Fi, they might just inaccurately locate you and then decide that you're in this close location of all the other people that turned off Wi-Fi, and you'll immediately get flagged as having been exposed to coronavirus, even if you weren't. So you might end up in more hot water by doing that, depending on how the app works. But these are just the questions that everyone's asking, and it would be nice to know more about what the apps are doing to decide whether we really want to allow that. All right, so Gmail stores account tokens in SQLite database, but it doesn't store passwords for Google. So you see a token is highlighted down here. You can get these things out of a table, but you're just getting some long token. This, by the way, is of course the right way to do it. Every service should have these cookies, basically, that give you only permission to access that one service. They shouldn't be storing your password at all on the phone. Unfortunately, third-party apps might store the plaintext password in other files, as we've seen in the projects. Email clients tended to put it in this accounts.db file, as we've seen other apps stored in configuration files here and there. All right, and the unlock patterns. If you use a gesture, it's stored in gesture.key. If you use a password, it stores a hash in password.key. And there are online tools to crack the pattern lock. And I wrote a project before where people would just write Python scripts to crack the password key. And I might add that project back into this class. It was kind of fun, but it's really more of a cryptography project than an Android project. I might put it in as extra credit. If you want it, you can go to my old version of the class from a year ago. It's there as Project 12X, but it's not that difficult. The point is there aren't really that many unlock patterns, so you can just try them all if you have 4 digits until you find one that matches the hash. And then there's a clipboard. The whole point of the clipboard is you have data in one app, you highlight it and copy it to clipboard and put it in another app, so the clipboard's available to every app. So if I can get any kind of malicious app on your phone, I can steal things out of the clipboard like passwords and such, and it has the last 20 items in there. People often complain about this as a vulnerability, although it seems to me like a feature, not a bug. The whole point of the clipboard is to copy data from one to another. Maybe there ought to be something called a secure clipboard used for passwords or something. Anyway, it's there, although this doesn't work on Genymotion machines. Anyway, you can, by the way, simulate user interaction from command line commands from the ADB shell. You can do input, and you can have the source from the keyboard, the touchpad, the mouse, or whatever, and send them any kind of command. So here you can force a tap. If you do dump sys window and grep for screen, so you can see screen in uppercase or lowercase, you'll see in the result a highlighted information here that tells you how big the screen is on your phone. So this phone is 1536 pixels by 1952 pixels. And then you can figure out how to tap something. So if your screen looks like that, you can figure out where the Drozer agent is, and you can then tap a location that is the coordinates of that. So from an ADB command shell, you can execute presses on the screen as if the user had done them. All right, and of course, if you want to steal the data and you have physical access to the phone, then you can just back up anything that's backed up. Now, some apps can be set to not allow backup, but normally every app does want you to be able to back it up, of course, because what if you use your phone? You're going to wish you could buy a new phone and retrieve the data. So typically they do allow backups, and you can steal the data that way. So let's take a look at this Kahoot, which is 128 chapter 8. All right. All right. I've got 28 Kahoots. April 1. And I'm going to make an alarm to remind me to go meet this student at noon tomorrow. All right. All right. Let's see, how many people have I got today? 10, so 7. That might be all that's coming. I'll give it another few seconds to see if we have more coming. 4, 5. All right, I guess that's it. All right, so which utility lets you simulate user taps? That's input. All right, good. And what is the intent that launches the Drozer agent? That's it. That is the thing called an intent. That PWN://. That's an intent, and that's the one that Drozer uses. All right. What content is safe to load over HTTP? Nothing is the right answer. Modern browsers complain if you load anything over HTTP, because even if it's something innocent, an attacker could add JavaScript to it or otherwise mess you up. You really should be using HTTPS for everything these days. All right. Which file might contain passwords from email clients? Yeah, that's accounts.db is where they tend to go. All right. And which method allowed privilege escalation in Android 4.4? That was the object input stream, kind of an esoteric one. All right. So now we see the winners. And let's see if I actually get names I can understand. Ampero, that's a real name. Good. And Rich is a real name. Good. Ampero, 3 Rich. And 3, those are all real names. Very convenient. All right. I've got the names here. All right. So that's all I wanted to do here. Let me just take a look at the timing of things. Let's go here. We are here in 128. And here's the schedule. So we are down past the holiday, and the other day I forgot to leave there also another holiday. So we're here. You should be up on your quizzes and a couple projects due next week. So let me know if anybody's having trouble. If you're being late on quizzes or something, I wouldn't worry about it. I regard the global pandemic as a sufficient excuse for being late on things. But please don't put everything off till the end or it'd be hard on my grader. That's all. Are there any questions about anything? You can use the chat room.
Sam, this is Yuri Donitz, one of your students.
Yeah.
First time me using Zoom, so I have a lot of questions that some people might find stupid. So if you don't mind, I would like to ask them.
Sure. Let me stop the